After all this, you still...
I still want that ghastly yes, and you had better deliver.
This is Greenhouse Gaslighting, a free and independent podcast discussing society and culture with a left-wing, down-to-earth perspective. If you've ever wanted a deep dive on the issues, but felt like the bar for entry was too high, then you're in the right place. All right, dear listeners, it's been... How long has it actually been since our last current affairs discussion? And what... So much has changed. So much has freaking changed. No, literally like 2 months ago was the last current affairs episode.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. It's been at the risk of editorializing myself, right? Like, it has been kind of difficult to set out an angle in response to the headlines, as we kind of predicted, with everything shifting on a day-by-day basis. And I don't know if we talked about this on the show briefly, but just a peek behind the curtains, is calling me at this hour. Spam risk. More and more of that lately. We've been trying to build these kind of more editorial narratives for the episodes when we talk about politics, and we wanted to kind of cover, what does the new Trump right look like? What's going on in the Democratic Party, and what is to be made of the term progressive. And with what we're going to get into today, I think everything we've been kind of sitting on has come to a precipice with John Fetterman's recent spate of controversies. What have you been seeing so far?
Yeah, I think before we get into Fetterman himself, I think it's kind of worth kind of commentating on all of briefly on all of that you're kind of talking about, that all kind of led into this.
Yeah.
Which is that when it comes to how the Democratic Party has sort of reconciled with Trump Part 2, whatever we want to call this era, to me, I think one of the things that has stood out is just how much of how absent a unified front is.
Yeah.
Right. There's not, and I mean, and I think that it makes some sense, but we have, it's hard to criticize them as a monolith other than the fact of other than a lack of consistency. Right. I think that's pretty much objectively true. But to me, it's this notion that the party seems really torn in how to respond going forward, right? You have, and I think Fetterman represents the kind of full manifestation and also condemnation of one wing of that response, right? Which kind of is from his former chief of staff, Gentleson. Has argued kind of that the party should sort of shift in the Fetterman direction, right? Someone who's willing to punch left to I don't even know if this reference means much to anyone anymore, but basically turn every week into a Sister Souljah moment, as they've kind of recreated that kind of trend. But that's really kind of, I think, what is at the heart of the Fetterman story, right? And even as we get into some of these, I don't know if scandals is quite the best term to refer to it. Some of it definitely is, tragic and probably not fair to make fun of someone under normal circumstances, but he's kind of earned it in a lot of ways. But your abundance crowd, your Matt Eagleus, I think Matt Eagleus specifically had said that well, even after all this came out, maybe Fetterman himself isn't the ideal poster child, but we need someone just like him, fix his brain and then he'll be perfect. Which maybe belies that perhaps the brain damage is why he's like this.
Yeah, you're right to bring up the abundance agenda crowd and Matty Iglesias, because this particular scandal in a microcosm is also indicative of like all these criticisms and all these internal fissures and kind of enforced contradictions within the Democratic Party. This is something that I'd hoped to get to earlier, but you're right that the abundance agenda is this attempt to kind of co-opt YIMBYism and a kind of small government is better type of policy prescription for the Democratic Party. And it's one that's trying to kind of paint away current political challenges and current contradictions under the guise of like a really shitty utopia. I don't even know. Have you read the Abundance proposal by Klein? Any chance, or is it just like the discourse around it you've been paying attention to?
I've mostly
that's
consumed
me.
the discourse. I have skimmed the source material a little bit, and I will say this. I don't think we plan on delving too much into like the Trump agenda with tariffs and everything, but like I will say, like there is a tragedy to the sense that like the right has more or less teed up like the perfect opportunity for a like abundance type agenda to be like sort of
Exactly
successful, and maybe that's the plan, right? Is it's sort of like to hijack further hijack both parties under a more kind of oligarchic approach, right? Because like I mean what's like I think as silly as like the abundance stuff is, man, it's going to sound enticing to voters after 4 years of like as Trump put, maybe instead of what $30 you get two, maybe instead of 30 Gundams, Adi, you're only going to get one a year. Like and I mean, there's a lot to unpack with all that silliness, but like it's I am a little worried that like, are we setting it up to kind of create a scenario where like like this is going to be the way of the party going forward.
it's also not to harp on this point too much, but like especially today with Trump just going, and again it's difficult to ascertain the motivations for Trump round two aside from whatever he's personally afraid of or likes in that moment. So now like being willing to re-enter brinksmanship with Netanyahu, willing to take a turn on affordability for prescription drugs, which again I don't know if you saw the speech about it in the White House. Do you think he was making fun of Elon Musk with that?
I haven't seen the speech yet. I'll have to.
It's just like I know a businessman, very very neurotic, very talented. He takes the fat shots.
Oh man,
Just people are
is a
laughing
shot
in
at
the-
him.
Who knows? But the whole thing that's been sticking in my craw about these things of recently is Democrats have fumbled the ball so bad that the Republicans can kind of just take it as their own W, and that's how do you even explain away that kind of loss? So kind of to drag us back to the topic at hand. Fordham University political science professor Christina Greer has described Fetterman alongside, check this, New York City Mayor Eric Adams as a, quote, simultaneously progressive, moderate, and conservative. After Fetterman rejected the progressive label again in 2023, NBC News called his ideology an unorthodox brand of blue-collar liberalism with a dash of outsider populism. And we had an episode concept and development about like the term progressive, how it's been used and misused. Maybe consider this a taste of that, or we might touch up on some of those concepts in this one. But let's maybe start with our initial exposures to Fetterman in like the national politics scene, right? Because I think like once you have Bernie in 2016 raise the profile and at least create like at the bare minimum these hyper interested spaces in progressive politics, Fetterman comes out as this new character that people take a surprising interest in. And I think I recall like at least being interested in his 2016 Senate run. I'll admit I bought it, and I'm not sure how much of this is a fait accompli. Like, was he always this cynical? Can we make the conclusion that due to brain injuries caused by a stroke, or due to the actual seeing how the sausage gets made, did that change his mind? But I'm really just thinking about like who is the guy that Fetterman has billed himself to be versus what we are seeing as like probably one of the most public crash outs of a US senator. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think even from the onset, like I think most of the, and like there was always like sort of problematic stories about him that were kind of like brewing in the background, right? Like him pulling like the gun on was it just a black guy that was like walking around him or whatever, or
Well, yeah, and this goes back to his time as the mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania. And there's like a lot of gossip, or at least like the kind of enemies you make in small town governance. But there is
Mm,
also this narrative of he's this highly educated white savior coming into like a Rust Belt majority black town and trying to like do a little bit of like a yimbyist progressive deal. The shotgun incident is crazier because a jogger was just running by his house. Fetterman thought there were gunshots, but it was kids shooting bottle rockets. And basically, Fetterman escalates the situation to an absurd end and pulls out a shotgun, points it at the dude's chest, and tries to aim it at his face, right? Um, it's just a gross, like, escalation of a situation that could have been handled far more calmly. Um, and in 2021, the victim of the shotgun incident, thankfully, I don't think there were any injuries. Um, he wrote that Fetterman had lied about everything that happened during the incident. And even though he went on to say that like Fetterman had done more good than that one bad act and shouldn't be defined by it, I don't necessarily know if I believe that today. But it is like just it speaks to this kind of like I'm progressive up until it's at my doorstep approach to crime and
sure.
race relations, and that's always stuck in people's craw about Fetterman.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair characterization of it. But also like it's like some of those things I think were really in the background, like when he was like gaining notoriety, right? They
Yeah,
weren't mainstream stories. They weren't like things that were like, and to the extent people were aware of them, I don't necessarily know that they were accepted fully at face value. So it's not preposterous that people accepted him as a sort of genuine or genuine adjacent progressive figure, at least in my opinion. Um, and I think to add to that, you have this kind of other aspect of this where it's like, is it, we did know that he was never like great on the issue of Israel. It was just the like that issue. I don't think was as salient when he was elected in 2022. Among other things, right? I mean, a lot of those things were just, it was kind of this background issue. It wasn't as big of a deal. Um, it's just some groups it certainly was, of course, but also like, it didn't like, we we're in a scenario where like, his vote doesn't necessarily matter when it comes down to how these issues are going to play out until like he has kind of become the face of sort of, especially in the Democratic Party, right? He's the face of Democratic opposition to aid in Gaza, to supporting Israel. He's really put himself as sort of the face of American support for Benjamin Netanyahu in a lot of ways. I think even more so than, I mean, at least in terms of like media salience one, I would say more so than any Republican.
Right. And it's one of those things that is in the subtext of the Democratic Party apparatus at large, right? Which is the criticism of people being progressive up until the issue of Palestinian liberation. And I do agree with the assessment that like at least up until 2023, the contours of the discussion and what salience the issue had in terms of people's thoughts on it or people's awareness was markedly different. And there is, people probably more qualified than us and people with more knowledge of the issue can comment on how those things have changed. They can probably comment on why it's become more mainstream and more acceptable to be pro-Palestine. I think that's a net good thing, but it does change the response of the pro-Israel crowd, and it's created, among others, a very kind of reticent radical position that accepts no dissent, accepts no criticism, and Fetterman taking on this issue in the way that he has, it's indicative of how the party is treating the issue, but it's also indicative of like his personal conduct as a senator, and his approach to the issue too is far more personally vindictive than it is grounded in at least something that would even mirror like conventional Hasbara. It's like it's almost like he's taking out all his personal resentment and people who have criticized him onto this issue. And I don't know if that's the correct assessment, but that seems to be my read of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that's a lot of it too. Is emphasizing more on that like personal vindictiveness angle, right? I think that's been like one of his biggest issues is just the extent to which, um, people see him as like just someone who's constantly punching down.
Right.
It's not just punching left; he's punching down towards people, and like just a lot of like just really like again like was it consequential like politically when he's up on the rooftop holding like the Israeli flag for hours in the middle of the night? Not really, but it's like it's such an embarrassing optic.
Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. Where like, it's not really part of any coordinated pro-Israel effort. It's not part of any like coordinated strategy. It's a more of just like I don't want to shift to like a comedic angle, but it's like just a kind of person, and especially because he's so highly online and his
Hmm.
style of posting is like not I mean I don't know if troll is even like the proper term for any of this anymore, but it's like it is attention seeking. It is seeking a kind of negative attention. It is seeking a kind of conflict for its own sake. And if you even take like some of his personal remarks on the issue and what he said, I would even understand if it was like the conventional, oh, we condemn violence, but we condemn Hamas
Yeah.
type of statement. It's to the point where he's literally like saying he's okay with like the deaths of civilians. It's him. I don't even want to repeat these things, right?
Kill them all, like
Yes.
like just and like I think he like slightly rolled it back as like, well, he just meant Hamas, but like he's also one of the people who's just argued, who's bought like the Israeli position hook, line, and sinker of they're all like Hamas or Hamas adjacent in some way. um yeah.
Which is, and that's another like thing to be said too, right? Where it's like the style of discourse on this issue. Like I think I don't know if this is your read of it, but I think like aside from people who were well versed on the issue back then and and had like a principled stance on Palestinian liberation when it wasn't as relevant as it is today, even though it should
Sure.
have been. Um, I don't think people were exposed to like the most rabid style of anti-Palestinian rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
And I think like to now is the point where people see it far more closely. And I again, like polling is suspect, but the issue salience has changed in contemporary, like, months. And to see like a US senator just, spit it back out from the Democratic Party, hook, line, and sinker,
Yeah.
it rubs everyone the wrong way.
Well, and it's, I mean, I think too that we've had it before from Democratic folks. I think Gottheimer's in the House. Yeah, Josh Gottheimer's in the House, but it's like having it be someone who's a little bit more like visible too, right? It's not just like, hey, it's the junior senator of West Virginia or something, like where it's like, okay, yeah, like you can kind of understand their perspective. Maybe you're not going to like it, but you just know that, like, okay, yeah, like it makes some sense that we elected some, kind of out there Democrat there. But like,
Right.
and yeah, like Pennsylvania is not the bluest state in on the face of the earth, but like you kind of hope for a little bit better than what you're getting out of Fetterman at the very least.
Right. Right. And I think like before we maybe get into like the articles that are at the center of this controversy, um I've been seeing a lot of this discourse. I don't know how much credence to give it, of being courted by the Republicans, um talks of him potentially switching parties. I don't know how relevant that is, but what should be called out is Fetterman's new, well, I won't even call it ability or decision. It's his repeated attempts to cozy up to Trump personally by going to visit him at Mar-a-Lago, but also like the adoption of the Trump 2 foreign policy plan. So just out of nowhere taking a hardline stance on Iran, um the actual stance he's taking on Israel. I'm not sure what is to be made of whether or not he'll formally um switch over to the Republican Party, but in practice, he's saying he's willing to vote however the Trump admin needs him to vote for foreign policy.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't necessarily think he'll defect, right? I just don't see like much of a reason to do that. Um, I mean, I could be mistaken, but in my mind, I'm just not seeing it. But yeah, I mean, it's this full-throated support of the Trump administration's foreign policy generally. And like sometimes we get like weird retractions on it. Like there's, and I think it comes up in one of the articles too, where like he was one of the, I think he was the only Democrat who voted. I don't even think technically voted in favor of like appointing fucking Secretary of
Hegseth?
Defense. What was that?
Hegseth?
Yeah, Hegseth. Yeah, I was like, why is his name? I'm like, his face is in my mind, like it's burned there, but I was just like, why is his name escaping me at this moment? But yeah, Hegseth. Um, I don't necessarily think, and I think he voted technically just on the procedural part of Hegseth. I don't think he voted in favor of confirming him. But like, there's like this weird stuff where it's like he kind of like wants to do it just to spite like the left, but also doesn't want to like actually do the vote. And it's like, I think there's like a quote about like he's like, do I have to be here for the vote? It's like as if like no senator has ever missed a vote in the history of the U.S. Congress before. Like, it's just so weird.
It's also strange because, like, and this is a repeat criticism of him from his time as lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania down to like his current and past senatorial term, is like this guy misses votes like nobody's fucking business. So like,
Right.
why bother now, right? But at the same time, it's like, and this is another thing to say too, right? Is that with all this being said, like this vision of Fetterman as like this no nonsense progressive guy, quote unquote, who was willing to break like the rules on etiquette and on wearing like a suit to the chamber.
Sure.
Whatever goodwill he earned from the public, in being open about his his mental health and all this, he's lost it immediately. And
Oh yeah.
I have to say this with full self awareness. I have worn probably the same clothes as Fetterman at the same times of the year, and it's like every time I see him in the Carhartt hoodie or the
You got
jacket,
twinsies.
I'm just like, God damn it! Exactly, exactly. But it's just like, so this oaf comes in complaining about how everyone's mean to him all the time, has utmost power on all these matters of import, and his fucking shtick is either that people were mean to him or that he has to stick around in a room. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, it's really strange. And I don't know. I mean, I think maybe it's just I don't know if it's the stroke or something that's just made him more like emotionally sensitive or something. I really don't know.
Yeah, and that's something that like I can't 100% comment on. Um, I'd been following Chapo Trap House's coverage of this on their podcast, and they had Sam Cedar on for when the most
Yeah.
recent bombshell piece came on. In Cedar's own take, it does read like someone who is dealing with brain issues. I don't have the lived experience, unfortunately, to back that up. But
Unfortunately, you don't have the lived experience of brain issues.
just my own brain issues, I guess. But with that being said, right, it speaks again to like the larger trend of, it's not just the gerontocracy, because that's somewhat of a separate issue, but the larger subculture of a lack of accountability that representatives have to their constituents, as well as just this trend of staff um, taking the worst possible of all approaches when it comes to handling a rogue representative. And I don't know enough about congressional back gossip to really comment on that, but it is something that we should worry about if your senator or your representative is in a nursing home and no one knows about it. If they're getting sloshed behind the wheel and nobody knows about it. That is stuff that, whether or not um it's handled tactfully or it's handled with some degree of like pomp and circumstance, the public has a right to know, in my opinion. I don't know.
No, I absolutely agree, and I think that it's especially just important in light of we it's no secret, yeah, like everyone's like our members are older and older every passing year, and there's just been this growing issue, and as I said, there's like a lot of like factional division within the Democratic Party over like how to respond to the Trump era, and one thing that's kind of standing out is you have some members like calling for like open primaries of folks, right? There's David Hogg, who's been kind of the DNC chair, who's like kind of, or no, not the DNC chair. What is he? The vice chair?
Something for youth strategy, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, he's been like calling for actively, like calling for let's primary certain members, or even the vice chair of the DNC. Yeah. Let's primary members, let's like encourage people to retire, and there's been like some older ones who I think Clyburn might have been one of them, who basically said that like, oh, if I retire, like my life is over. I've got
If
nothing
that's
nothing
what it
better to do.
takes.
Right, like I don't know how enticing that is as like a don't do it. um but yeah, like it's just kind of this weird thing where we've had like all these older folks holding on to power, and like Fetterman, age isn't his issue. It's just a general mental competency thing because he had a stroke, and I remember initially everyone, yeah, like we all kind of rallied behind that, right? Because it was something that it wasn't something he could control. It was something that I think people wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt for, but there's been some really dangerous consequences of it. And even if it's not necessarily that he needs to step down just virtue of having had a stroke. I think there's things that he could just be more responsible with. Certainly, like the story of, and I kind of forgot about the car accident, but like where he's like driving like 70 miles down the road while he's like scrolling through Twitter, because he's like clinically obsessed with this stuff.
That's a repeat thing,
With his
like in
family in the
the
car. Yeah.
right, and this is the thing that came out in the piece that was out in February, which is let me see if I can find the exact quote. I don't know if I can find the exact quote, but like they get on this very like clearly in the piece that he does doom scroll anti-Palestinian content. And that's what this gets down to, right? Where it's like I can understand being driven or motivated on an issue anyway, but like when it gets to this level of obsessiveness that like you've got your wife and kids in the car and you're getting into an accident, checking your phone. And the funniest thing about it too is like it's not everyone's talking about it like it's a fender bender and he was driving a smart car. He's driving like a full-size SUV with this.
Yeah.
No one's talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. So let's see. Where do we even begin to unpack this? Do we start with the February piece? Do we start with
I guess the February piece makes sense, and then we'll get into the newer one.
Okay. So the February piece, and I think this is before his chief of staff Adam Gentleson flips, and Gentleson's a bit of a Grima Wormtongue figure in all this. We'll get to him in a second. I don't know how else to describe him, but like his repeat statement is John Fetterman has struggled with depression his whole life, right? I'm sure probably 100% of the listenership of this podcast is dealing with the same issue. So with that being said, right, like I think a lot of people do feel powerless or they feel upset about things that are obviously out of their control, but should be better, should be run more logically. And I think it's somewhat insulting and very just patronizing for someone in power to be like, oh yeah, actually I suffer from depression. It's really bad. It's like, you're a US senator. Like you have the ability to act on it. If you're depressed in your position, like what is this? So the February piece is probably the first jump into building out not only this narrative that the Democrats should begin to shift right on all issues, and also that their, or at least Fetterman's position of being this far right on Israel is somehow justified.
And this is kind of a defection from Gentleson's like past views, from what I gather as well, right? Like, wasn't he kind of previously more of like a Warren style Democrat?
I think he was a Warren supporter in the 2020 primaries. He also worked on Harry Reid's staff. And
and Reid was I would say probably one of the more progressive Democratic leaders we've had like in Congress in decades.
Yeah, like I wouldn't call
certainly
him
more than the current crop.
For sure. I wouldn't call him left leaning by any stretch, but like he was willing to invite left of center staffers. He was willing to hear out those perspectives in a way that's much more open-minded than other members of the Democratic caucus.
Mm-hmm.
But this is also the point where and I guess to revisit the incidence of the stroke was actually his re-election bid for Senate or his first election bid.
I want to say it was the most recent.
Yeah, so I think like that was a big argument that was used against him was, hey, this guy had just suffered a stroke. Like, is he even qualified to run against Dr. Oz? And as it turns out, a lot of people at least did give him some goodwill in that, hey, I think that's a low bar for you to make that attack. And also for what it's worth, Dr. Oz really did kind of shoot himself in the foot very obviously several times.
Oh yeah, I mean, and Oz was like, I mean, I would say was a really bad candidate, but like obviously, he did, okay, for being a bad candidate. But maybe that's kind of kind of connected to this, kind of not at the same time.
So from the February article too, this comes in. The quote near death thing was the stroke he suffered on May 13th, 2022, 4 days before the Democratic Senate primary. After he won, his wife Giselle delivered the victory speech for her hospitalized husband. In November, he handily defeated Dr. Oz with a heavy assist from the mainstream press that all but ignored his condition, presumably on the grounds that he had a D after his name. Damn, this piece is really going in on him. 6 weeks after taking office, Fetterman, struggling with the effects of the stroke, checked himself into Walter Reed to treat his depression. I don't doubt his acuity, but the effects of his stroke are detectable in his halting speech and his occasional struggle to pronounce words. So let's see. Going down in this piece. So, what does the Democratic Party need to do to revive itself? Mr. Fetterman claims not to know, but it's clear he has at least half the answer. Shed the highfalutin superiority on trendy cultural issues. Quote, it's this old argument. They're too dumb. They don't understand. They're voting against their interests. But they're not dumb. Maybe they have different values from yours. They're not dumb. Oh my god. What do you even mean by that? What do you even mean? Without stopping, he moves on to the larger climate agenda. And now the media looks at the weather and says it's on fire, do something, do something. A reference, I assume, to the Los Angeles wildfires. I mean, they needed you to do something, man. And then they're all but saying, hey, you Democrats, you have no balls, do something. And I'm like, well, what? Yell louder at the protest? Go block a road? What? I mean, we've done that. You've played out the extreme things and you clearly don't understand what happened.
And like the thing is, like I get that, like I'm somewhat sympathetic to the idea that like it's not necessarily like super easy to respond to some of these things in a meaningful way, right? I get it. Democrats are in the minority, blah blah blah. I understand all those arguments. So I guess technically at that point they weren't, they were still in a lame duck session. But I guess they would have needed the House. But either way, it's like the thing is, it's like we turn to people who are, paid to ostensibly have those answers and to come up with something a little bit more satisfying than just like, yo, what are we going to do? And that's been a defining issue of Democrats for, the past, half year at this point. Hakeem Jeffries did the same thing. He's like, well, like, what leverage do we have? Chuck Schumer giving away one of the few pieces of leverage they have, before the shutdown. Like, it's, like all of these things that in my mind, it's like, yeah, I understand that there's some difficulties here in terms of like, what do we actually do? But you're the ones who are supposed to have some semblance of an answer on that.
Yeah, even if it's like, hey, we'll figure it out, is probably better than what they've been doing right now. So with that being
Yeah.
said, too, his final answer in the February piece is insane. And this is in response to the question, are you going to remain in your party? Quote, I feel lonely and I'm struggling to find what the true North Star is as a committed Democrat. Oh, fuck you. I'm not changing my party, but what's the way forward? It's a more substantive response than I thought I'd get. The words, unless I'm reading them wrongly, suggest that he may run as an independent. Look, he goes on, I can't follow every example of performance art because I try to be honest, and I don't ever want to lie. But I'm trying to explain to people America has made us, the Democrats, sit in the corner. Republicans don't need our votes for many things, and now that's where we are. Okay, John Fetterman.
But
I get
why
that.
give them your vote if they don't need it?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So they you said they don't need your vote, so why give it? Like,
Yeah.
okay, America has made the Democrats sit in the corner. Why? Why? So I really didn't know how this was going to develop further from there, but then this came out. What's the date this came out? Was this the 2nd of May? I think so. I think early May
Yeah.
this piece comes out and is now like the defining conduit through which you can look at the rot at the Democratic Party today. And basically, what do you take of what do you make of Adam Gentleson really being willing to kind of throw Fetterman somewhat under the bus with this piece? Do
I
you
mean,
think he's trying to cover his ass in case something bad happens, or what do you think?
yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty complete throwing him under the bus. And I know there's been a lot of discourse that's really kind of emerged ever since all of the issues with Senator Feinstein, right? Which is that um, members of congressional staff should probably be held somewhat to account over things that have been happening with their senators, right? And like there's been a lot of division over this. A lot of people do not know, like, is it truly fair to like blame them for this? Is it not? I mean, I think we're kind of at the point where it's like quite clearly it's a problem, right? Like where you have senators or House members as well, where their staff is like blatantly covering up like huge issues they have. I think it's really problematic. And you know, someone like Gentleson, I think he's trying to. I mean, even if he's not necessarily trying to like cover himself up in that sense, maybe it's some of it's just like clearing his conscience, right? I could very much see that being the case as well, where it's just like, hey, and again, his attacks are mostly kind of focused on like, this guy is not mentally all there, and this is me like maybe I'm going to save a few lives down the line by like getting him the help that he needs, even though realistically he should have acted months ago at this point. And Fetterman's been there for about over 2 years at this point, right?
Right, and in the piece itself, so if this came out at the start of May, at the first paragraph of the piece is in May 2024, him writing to Fetterman's doctor about his concerns. So he's been sitting on this for 1 year. Now, is it, the classic DC stereotype of cynical political operative wants to see how this plays out? Is it CYA? Is it him trying to pitch an open job application to a consulting firm? I don't know.
Mhm.
But you are correct. He's been sitting on this for an absurd amount of time.
Yeah.
And also, just again, not to roast him again, but to get to the article, his 1,600-word email came with the subject line "concerns," and it contained a list of them, from the seemingly mundane "he eats fast food multiple times a day." Okay, whom among us? To the scary, "we do not know if he is taking his meds, and his behavior frequently suggests he is not. We often see the kind of warning signs he discussed," Gentleson wrote. "Conspiratorial thinking, megalomania. For example, he claims to be the most knowledgeable source on Israel and Gaza around, but his sources are just what he reads in the news. He declines most briefings and never reads memos." Right. High highs and low lows.
You are exposed to those memos and everything.
Oh my god. Lying in ways that are painfully, awkwardly obvious to everyone in the room. That's a classic one, because it's like, I mean, come on, it's Congress. Isn't everyone doing that? But if that's something that, your physician's warning you to look about, and it's obvious the politician's doing that, holy shit.
Right.
And then even then too, like, he drove his car so recklessly that staff refused to ride with him. This has been out for like a while now, ever since the car crash. He says he has a biometric safe for a gun. It's like, why are you prepping for the apocalypse as a senator? What's going on here?
He knows things we don't. That's what's going on here.
Now let's see. So here's Jennelson really trying to, cover his ass two ways.
Oh, yeah.
So part of the tragedy here is that this could be a man who could be leading the Democrats out of the wilderness, Jentleson said. But I think he's struggling in a way that shouldn't be hidden from the public. I hear that, Mr. Jenselson, but who hid it from the public?
Right. Like
And getting to Jenselson too, he's a longtime Washington operator. He's worked for a liberal think tank and written a book about the filibuster. So the author and him met first back when he worked for Harry Reid, then the Democratic leader of the Senate. Later, they became friends. Jenselson continues to believe broadly in the Fetterman project that Democrats would benefit from punching left more often, and that voters crave a heterodox candidate willing to stick a thumb in the eye of his own party. I mean, I guess that's what Trump's doing, but like, who's that working for right now?
well, I don't even know if Trump is really doing that per se, right? Because it's just like he can like like he can stick his eye in like the eye of his party, stick a thumb in the eye of his party or whatever. But like the party then just like I don't know, they like grow a new eye and pretend that like he didn't do that, and that they've always had this position.
Yeah, and I think like there is something to be said too, because like the broader subtext of everything that's going on right now, especially when you look at the current state of the Trump project, is let's just dismantle the current neoliberal order on a whim and see what happens. Because it's like, is it because you want to watch the world burn? Is it because you don't understand how it works? It's like there's been a very funny take of it as like Trump is the biggest degrowth advocate, which I don't buy that as a joke, but it is this idea of like he's just kind of mashing buttons and see what sticks. But then
I think
go ahead.
a lot of it too with Trump is like I think it's just a fundamental like it's just a warped worldview, right? Like the way he talks about like tariffs and trade, he's like, oh, we're losing a lot of money. It's like, well, like that's I mean, like it's a transaction. You're paying money, you're getting something in return, but he just doesn't comprehend that at all. Like I mean, even like with like the supposed like caps on drugs. Um, well, one, I mean, the courts have already blocked this in the past, and which I mean, they'd probably step in for that because that would affect the domestic, businesses. But also, like, I mean, he was going to put huge tariffs on pharmaceuticals coming in from abroad, anyways. So it's like, it's they're contrary positions that aren't remotely consistent.
Yeah, and I think like there was a post Sky showed me during like the real peak of like the tariff panic, right? And someone was trying to explain, was asking like, okay, Trump supporters, can you explain to me what the intent is here? Like, why should these other countries accept that these tariffs be placed on their goods? And someone's like mask off response kind of said it all, which was they should bear it for the privilege of getting to sell in the United States market. Which is like, okay, so you really are that xenophobic. You really are that fucking racist. But it's also like a fundamental misunderstanding of like the post Nixon world order, right? It's like a fundamental misunderstanding of like, this is why the dollar is the reserve currency. This is why all these countries produce and we consume. Like, there's a reason why that happens. So the Democrats, in response, are confused, I imagine, for a variety of reasons. But one is, so how do you justify the old order? Because that's a contradiction in of itself. But then also, you would have to basically fundamentally admit, yeah, there is a sublimated anger from all these past actions that has become wordless. It takes the avatar of Trump and it's this kind of self-flagellation or self-injury.
Yeah.
But we can't admit that out loud because then it would also expose our own culpability in this. So what happens? I think you do have this kind of like sublimated response through Fetterman of just spiting the party because you don't see a way out of this. I don't see a way out of this, so I'll take people out with me. I don't know.
And some of it too, I think is probably selfishly motivated, that like they like see it as like, well, this could distance me from like the unpopular aspects of the party, and I can double down on other aspects of it or whatever. I can get, it helps my own personal brand to be a jackass. Granted, with Fetterman, I haven't seen, like, other than like APAC money, I guess. I haven't seen anything to indicate to me that that is actually benefiting him in any way, politically, right? Like, I don't think anyone is assuming he is going to win re-election at this point, because even then, and it's like, if you're trying to like read the tea leaves or whatever, um I don't see how, um your perception of, um half of these things could lead you to a scenario where you think this is like what's going to benefit, um you in the long term, right? Like,
Hmm.
where it's like, like, yeah, like, voters, maybe they don't like what the Democratic Party's putting down. Um, but like, it's not like conservatives in the base are really on board with full-throated support for Israel, right? Like, I mean, maybe,
Right.
like, I don't think they're opposed to it, but they're not, it's like, well, this isn't, like, who cares about them? Like, it's like, I care about myself, I care about, America. Um, that's the thing that's just very strange to me, is that it just doesn't seem like, in my mind, that there's much of a market for what he is pursuing.
That I agree with. I do agree with. So it does also like speak to like the confusion and just chaos of the moment of like, so who wanted this?
Yeah.
And again, there's that mask off quote from Trump where he's like, but they did vote for this. It's been
Yeah.
hilarious, and just like something sank in me when I saw him say that, where it's like, oh, he really did say that shit. Like, he's not
And
gonna walk this back.
yeah, and it's like, the thing is, it's like, I've been saying the same thing when it came to like the terrorists and whatnot. I'm like, this is like one of the few things he campaigned on. Why would you think, oh, well, maybe he won't do this? And then there he is.
Exactly.
Actually, you did vote
Exactly.
for this. I'm like, wow.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And that's what I'm saying, right? Where it's like people are getting like fucked over by this left and right,
Yeah,
unemployment's up, people are struggling to just keep up with the cost of things. There is uncertainty left and right. Even if things look like they're stabilizing, uneasiness is in the air. You can see just like palpable sadness or like
yeah.
just anxiety on people's faces, right? So it's just like, who's who's going to speak up like in response to this, right? You would think that this would be a great opportunity for an opposition party to like come in, fill the gap, and like we've been saying, there's
And
infight.
I
Oh,
think
go
the
ahead.
tariffs have been a really difficult one for the opposition party to like sort of step in, because it's like, labor kind of backs tariffs. Like, I mean, the unions are in favor of it. I think it's kind of misguided.
I agree.
Um,
I agree.
like, I was asked about this. I actually did get quoted about it in an article where, it was like, how do like auto workers in Michigan feel about the tariffs? And I was like, well, if any group is going to support them, it's in theory them, but at the same time, like, it might keep their jobs, but they're still going to have to deal with higher costs like the rest of us. So, and it's not going to add jobs for them either. Like, I've never seen any evidence that, and again, like, the market model that Trump is trying to recreate is like the Gilded Age, where, yeah, there was manufacturing happening in the United States, but your salary adjusted for inflation was like 20K a year working in a factory. Like, I don't think anyone wants that.
Which is the most confusing part, and like to the point about auto. I know we're making a massive digression here. Is like car dealers are struggling to get even domestically produced cars off the lots right now. So like,
Yeah.
why are you producing when there's like, even if the theoretical demand exists, there's no cash to actually facilitate that. And then
Mhm.
like, if we're trying to pull out of global markets and punish foreign markets or foreign companies for trying to sell in the US domestic market, Okay, what do you do with the glut of U.S. produced goods now that the tariffs are in place? You
Yeah.
think anyone's gonna want them now? You don't think anyone's gonna try to tariff you back in spite? Like, again, just collapsing the consumerist model on a whim,
Yeah.
and
And
no
like
one
I mean
having a
there's
response to that.
right, and like obviously like the degrowth I mean I don't know how much I mean I see it as a joke. I know some people probably don't. um, but like it is kind of like that, right? Where it's, there's outcomes that are sort of reminiscent of that, but to what end?
Exactly, and like the sincere approach to degrowth is it's one that's mediated, it's one that's negotiated out, and it's one that doesn't punish people for continuing to exist while the changes are made, right? So it's just like, again, like in the backdrop of the insane cruelty of this new Trump term with
Hmm.
unhinged justifications and responses to mass deportation, letting people get disappeared overseas, and even just
Yeah.
there's just the crackdown on civil liberties here, right? Like the subtext of this being that the opposition party is kind of throwing their hands up and being like, "Well, you were mean to us." It's I don't even know what to say about that. So, there's a couple just bombshell revelations from this. Where do we go with the fact that he was freaking out about getting Sam Brinkman-Feed's money? Um, his wife like having like a really fucking like aggravating confrontation with him over like his Israel policy, or do we want to talk about his outburst at a Pennsylvania educators union meeting?
Man, I mean, I like a good domestic situation. Let's
Let's
start
go. Let's go
there.
for it. Let's get a little drama going. Let's get a little drama going. Okay. In the days after the October 7 attack, Israel declared war and retaliated with brute force, killing Hamas forces as well as thousands of civilians. In the U.S., progressives began calling for a ceasefire to at least pause the carnage. Fetterman felt differently. Quote, now is not the time to talk about a ceasefire, he posted on October 18th. He had 9 days to think about this. We must support Israel in efforts to eliminate the Hamas terrorists who slaughtered innocent men, women, and children. If his base was surprised by this, perhaps they hadn't been paying it enough attention. While Israel had not been a prominent issue in previous campaigns, Fetterman had been talking about support for Israel for years. Quote, I'm not really a progressive in that sense, he said in 2022.
Yeah, but what does that
Um,
mean?
I mean, and that's what it gets down to, right? Is like, I'm progressive
Like
except
I'm
for Palestine.
committed to Israeli security. Like what is that? Like there's a difference between that and because I mean I think that's something too where it's like yeah someone might have been like uh, you know pro Israel up until a certain point, right? That didn't necessarily mean that they would endorse what we have seen since October 7th.
Oh my gosh. And to that end too, right? Like so early on in the conflict, 16 of his former campaign staffers wrote a letter anonymously saying that they found his full-throated support for Israel to be a gutting betrayal. Gentleson had taken to defending Fetterman on X from such criticisms, posting, the thing about being a staffer is that no one elected you to represent them. All right, Captain Obvious, that's not what people are upset about. But it wasn't just the staffers who were upset. There's also Fetterman's wife, Giselle, who had become something of a political celebrity in her own right. She is a
I feel like
kind-hearted.
that's quite an exaggeration to be honest, but
I think what they're talking about, and this is the thing, right? Is like she's a celebrity to who? Like you and 5,000 Twitter users who follow the same people, I guess. But I think like
yeah.
Sky showed me some of the stuff when like it was Fetterman versus Oz, and I think Giselle was kind of seen as like, she's Fetterman's cool wife, and like she was
I guess
always like,
that's fair.
yeah, like she was always fashionable, that kind of stuff. But Giselle, who had become something of a political celebrity in her own right, she is a kind-hearted philanthropist, the proprietor of a free store in Braddock that gave away goods and clothing, a formerly undocumented immigrant from Brazil, and a vocal progressive. In early November, just weeks after the attack, Giselle arrived at her husband's office and, according to a staffer present, got into a heated argument. Quote, they are bombing refugee camps. How can you support this? The staffer recalled her saying with tears in her eyes. Now this is just dick move. Quote, that's all propaganda, Fetterman replied.
Yep.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Later, a still visibly upset Giselle pulled the staffer aside. She asked him if members of Fetterman's team were pushing for him to take these stances for political reasons. The staffer told her the opposite was true. Many of them were as upset as she was. If you're pushing back on this, there's no hope, the staffer recalled her saying. This is horrible news. A few days later, Giselle texted a different staffer, I'm at a breaking point and I can't co-sign this any longer. I'd love some help in language to separate myself from this. Can anyone help me? Bear in mind, this is probably in addition to just all the bullshit he's been doing with like the driving accident.
Yeah.
I think they were joking about this on Chapo, but like he literally like had an outburst at like his kid's birthday party, which is like epic. It's really cool, man. That's really cool. That's not Reddit at all.
So there was a different birthday party, because I know there's the one that he like apparently no-showed because some friend from grad school had died.
That's the one. It's just like, why didn't you come up to your kid's birthday? Yeah, you know, my friend from
which just sounds like I mean, it sounds like an excuse. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna say. I mean, like, if his friend from grad school died, like, I mean, that's sad.
Well,
but like,
it's one thing
like
to be like my friend died. You know what I'm saying? It's like my friend died versus my friend from grad school. Now you're creating layers of separation where it's like, were they really your friend? Come on, what's going on? Oh my god. So, and then now we also bring in Carl Fetterman, his dad, who in some other pieces, it's revealed like he kind of helped bankroll a little bit of Fetterman's early start in Braddock with some of the nonprofit stuff. So very interesting to note there. So Giselle might have disliked what her husband was up to, but his father loved it. Carl Fetterman, an insurance executive, was far more conservative than his son. He used to have a magnet on his fridge that warned that his dog bites Democrats, and he watched Fox News constantly. When Fox would air segments about Fetterman's strong stances on Israel or invite him on as a guest, the senator's father would, according to former staff, always call to say how proud he was. It's daddy issues. It's daddy issues all the way fucking down, folks.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, it's brought him back to the stroke brought him back to a time where he needed his father's approval desperately.
According to one of his staffers, Fetterman's response was that he didn't want to give in to the quote woke mob. God damn it. And that anyone upset was welcome to resign. Eventually he took it down, a post down. Let's see. Oh my god, this is him just trying to like his wife is trying to like get him off his phone and like get access to his Twitter account so he wouldn't fucking like do this shit. One staffer recalled overhearing Giselle on speakerphone that December saying to Fetterman, "Who did I marry? Where's the man I married?" Oh my god. That's actually sad. That's actually really sad. I'm trying to find the segment about his outburst. Okay, so one staffer told me that there would be entire days when they couldn't let anyone outside the office be around him because he was in, quote, some sort of state and might say, quote, really fucked up shit to constituents. Sometimes he would just shut down. He was saying unhinged shit, according to one text, and spending more time on social media. Stern wrote to the group that it seemed to him like Fetterman was spiraling and that his constant doom scrolling, I think he's on essentially all day now, will only make things worse. It's self-sabotage, Katz texted. Him against the world is his comfortable place. Another staffer chimed in to say the boss had picked a fight in the Senate cloakroom when an attendant wouldn't let him bring a friend in. He said something to the effect of, "You let all these imbeciles in here, but you won't let me bring in my friend." They probably cut that off, his friend from grad school.
Yeah, it comes full circle. That's the friend who died.
Oh my god. In May 2024, Jentelson decided it would be best to lay everything out there. Quote, "I wanted to do what I could to try to get him help. That's why I sent the letter." He also worried that Fetterman could end up inadvertently hurting someone else. He engages in risky behavior, he wrote in the letter. He drives recklessly, he FaceTimes, texts, and reads entire news articles while driving? How you read an article while driving? And I don't mean while
Speech
stopped
is a
at a.
powerful tool.
Oh my god. He reads and FaceTimes while driving at high speeds. That's crazy. And they get into the
Because that's when the car crash happened. Was he was like, well, I mean, he was reading Twitter or whatever.
I didn't know this was after he caught a red eye flight back from Los Angeles after taping an episode of Bill Maher's show. Fuck this guy. His staff urged him to have someone pick him up from the airport and drive him home. Don't they got a budget for like a guy to get you a taxi? What the fuck? But he refused. Just before 8 a.m., according to a police report, Fetterman was traveling at well over 70 miles per hour on I-70 when he smashed his Chevy Traverse, so there we go, into the back of a 62-year-old woman's Impala, totaling both cars. This segment brought to you by Chevrolet. Giselle, who had been in the back seat, suffered a pulmonary contusion and spinal fractures. Fetterman, calling from the side of the road, told a staffer he had fallen asleep at the wheel and handed the phone to a police officer. It's a miracle no one died, the officer said. So immediately after, now they're talking about his visit to Mar-a-Lago. So after Donald Trump won the election, Fetterman did something no other Democratic senator dared to do. He went to Mar-a-Lago. Quote, I didn't bend any knee. They reached out and invited me, Fetterman told me. And if you're a senator from a critical state and the president would like to have a conversation, that's part of our responsibility. Giselle, however... Exactly. So Giselle wasn't so keen on traveling with him. It was a whole saga, said a former staffer. She wasn't going to go and they had fights about it. To convince her, Fetterman told her to think of this as an opportunity to showcase what a model dreamer looked like in front of the president-elect to soften his views on illegal immigration. They tried that. If she didn't go, Fetterman said, she'd lose the right to complain about whatever he did as president. My God. He said in a small group with senior staff, I told her to put up or shut up, the staffer recalled. If she doesn't go, I don't want to hear about it.
Nice.
Oh my God. Husband of the year, folks. Oh my God.
Yeah, you know?
Oh my God. Let's see, what else? He was the only Democrat.
What else do you want? What more do you want from this man?
My God, my fucking God. The Mar-a-Lago pilgrimage was a start, but Fetterman went further. He was the only Democrat to vote for Trump's pick for Attorney General, Pam Bondi. He posed for a thumbs up photo with Elise Stefanik, then the nominee for U.S. Ambassador to the UN, and he came close to supporting Hegseth, the nominee for Secretary of Defense, who had been dogged by reports of excessive drinking, financial mismanagement, and sexual misconduct. That's a great way to summarize everything. Shit.
Yeah.
Oh my God. We are going to have massive issues internally when he votes for Hegseth, a staffer texted in mid-January. You think?
It's like all he's remembered for.
Oh my God. Fetterman became so torn by the decision that on a day of the... Okay, so this is back to the do I need to be there? That on the day of a procedural vote that would move his nomination closer to completion, he floated the idea of not voting at all. Quote, what if I just left? He asked his staff. Yeah. Instead of voting, he should just sneak out of Washington and hole up at his parents' place in Pennsylvania. I felt like I was looking at a 6-8-year-old, the staffer said. Jesus. Oh my God.
It's like run away to his parents' home. His response to this.
Oh my God. So some of Fetterman's behavior was leaking out into the public. Last year, the Sunrise Movement posted a video of Fetterman mocking and filming one of his constituents, a climate activist, who was calmly trying to... I remember this. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was calmly trying to ask him about his stance on pipelines. Earlier this year, a passenger on a flight to Pittsburgh filmed a video of Fetterman getting into an argument with the pilot about wearing his seatbelt in a way that was visible to the crew. If you want to go to Pittsburgh, it's simple, the pilot explains. You're going to have to follow our instructions or be asked to get off the airplane. He's one of these guys. He's one of the guys. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Now, this is where it gets insane. This is a meeting he had with a member of J Street. Quote, you can't reform a carton of sour milk, he told the J Street representative notes from the meeting, referring to the Palestinians. Fetterman said he did not believe in a two-state solution and claimed he had never met an Arab person who would condemn Hamas. Oh, fuck me. Quote, correction. The notes from the meeting stated only a single Arab he has met with that staff was present for wouldn't outright condemn this guy. You're judging people off of, oh my, fuck this guy. Fetterman went on to make statements that shocked people. In opposing a ceasefire, he said, quote, let's get back to killing. A person who heard the conversation told me, he said, kill them all. In a statement, Fetterman denied the account, saying any reference to killing was solely about Hamas. And I do support the destruction of that organization down to its last member. Oh my fucking god.
Yeah, it's easy, you know.
Oh my fucking god. I'm really just trying to get off get to the part where it was his most, so I think this was probably immediately after this piece had come out. I'm trying to pull the link up we had to it. 1 sec. I put in the Discord 1 sec. So yeah, not too long after this article had come out. So I think like maybe at least a week has passed. Fetterman had an outburst that made one of his own staffers cry when meeting last week with the teachers union. The meeting took place.
There was also another. It's unrelated, but there was also a meeting that he had early on with Sherrod Brown, where they were like, "Oh, this is gonna work great," but then he was just like really awkward and couldn't talk. I think that's the story where the figure eights came in.
Oh, I do remember that. Let's see.
Where I had joked before when we were going to do this episode, I was like, "Oh, I need to like do some figure eights while doing this," which I pace a lot, I'll admit, but doing it in a figure eight formation feels really awkward. So, I'm not going to say more power to him, but, teach their own, I guess.
Well, okay, so a week later, Democratic Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown came to pay Fetterman a visit in his new Capitol Hill office. They seemed destined to get along, each hailed from a purplish-red state, and exuded an everyman energy more likely to be found in union halls than in the halls of Congress. But their meeting went awry. Brown tried his best to get a conversation going, but according to two people present, Fetterman was virtually catatonic. He could barely string two sentences together, talking so quietly that everyone in the room had to strain to hear him. Fetterman then stood up and began walking around the office in tight loops, a move the two staffers described as doing figure eights. After Brown left, Fetterman paced from room to room inside, from one room inside his office complex to another and back again. At one point, one of his aides said he walked into the hallway peering over his shoulder as if he were being followed by shadowy figures. So this segment is also kind of crazy because it's coming after, so this is the Sam Bankman-Fried scandal. So the Times reported that the PAC had spent $212,000 supporting Fetterman, a sizable amount, but in the context of the most expensive Senate race in the history, which surpassed $300 million in total spending, it was barely a blip. The staff knew it was not great optics to be linked to a crypto scammer, but as far as scandals went, it was pretty minor. Fetterman, however, fretted it would end his career. In long meetings and phone calls, he was unable to shake the idea he might never get sworn in. Every call would be like an hour with him, trying to convince him to talk him out of some crazy fantasy, a former staffer said. Fetterman denies these claims. Oh my god. So, yes, the meeting I'm talking about with the teachers union. So the meeting took place the day before a bombshell report blew the lid off the closely guarded health history of the 55-year-old Pennsylvania senator. Fetterman was talking to representatives from a teachers union in his home state when things went haywire. The senator began repeating himself, shouting and questioning why everybody is mad at me, why does everyone hate me, whatever did I do, and slamming his hands on the desk, according to one person who was briefed on what occurred. So he's crashing out. He's crashing out at the teachers union. As the meeting deteriorated, a staff member moved to end it and ushered the visitors into the hallway, where she broke down crying. The staffer was comforted by the teachers, who themselves were rattled by Fetterman's behavior, according to a second person who was briefed separately on the meeting. Asked about the meeting with the teachers' union's representatives, Fetterman said in a statement through his office that they had had a spirited conversation about our collective frustration with the Trump administration's cuts to our education system. He said he will always support our teachers, and I will always reject anyone's attempt to turn Pennsylvania's public schools into a voucher program. See, did they go down into anything here? Yeah, reached by telephone, Aaron Chapin, the president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association, who was in the meeting with Fetterman, said he didn't want to discuss what was a private conversation. Only one staffer was willing to go public with the claims, and Fetterman has denied them. Some of the anonymous staffers shared marital strife. So this is just about the piece we were going through earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, so adding this to the list of just public outbursts, an inability to deal with criticism, and like what is worrying cognitive issues, right?
Yeah.
On in one hand, Fetterman is a avatar for the current state of the Democratic Party, one that is unfit to meet the moment entirely, and when it's not able to live up to its stated ideals, it sinks into cynicism and being petty. At the same time, though, what is to be said about the party that has enabled this? I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the thing that we're trying to reconcile right now, right? And I think that that's kind of been, um, a pronounced aspect of this is just people trying to figure out what is the way forward for the party. The party's somewhat at war with itself, probably an overdue conflict, if I'm being honest. And it'll be kind of interesting to see where things go.
Yeah, and I think like we haven't even touched on all the strained responses of the party as is to meet the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about Bernie and AOC pulling out big crowds that are kind of creating a big tent, progressive flavored momentum that's anti-Trump. But even at these rallies, there's like reports of like the minute calls are made for freeing Palestine, or there's some like energy from the crowd on that, they're either shut out or escorted out. Then if you take just domestically, right? So here in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, who's been a maligned Democratic politician from the Trump wing, who has again been the subject of an assassination attempt from Trump supporters, right?
Kidnapping attempt.
Sorry, kidnapping.
They're gonna hold her hostage. I think the intention was to,
whatever it was, right? Is like the Trump wing has gone on record as like trying to malign and paint Michigan Democrats as like obstacles to the Trump agenda.
Yeah.
And suddenly we're seeing a statewide effort from Democratic politicians in charge to kind of cozy up to Trump. So whether you look at Attorney General Dana Nessel allowing the FBI in and federal agencies in to detain people under, spurious allegations, whether it's Whitmer cozying up to Trump quite literally in domestic manufacturing, there seems to be, in addition to just how confused and disorganized resistance to the Trump admin is looking, it's also looking like there's a mainstream push within the party to just accept things as they are and collaborate. And that does not bode well. It doesn't bode well, especially when the people who are signing up for this were effectively browbeaten into doing so. What does that say about the party? What does that say about the quote unquote resistance? And what does it say about the state of American liberalism? Is there truth to that idea? Again, I know it's a bit of a controversial statement, or it's always said pejoratively of, scratch a liberal and a fascist bleeds. But it's incredibly worrisome that like the Democratic Party isn't even committed to surface level opposition anymore. They're not even interested in rhetorical opposition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, and it's something that where like I know a lot of people have always kind of expressed like envy over kind of how how the Republican Party is comparatively, right? Where they I don't know how well I would push this, but like they function somewhat well in the opposition, right? Um, they are able to coalesce their frustration. And yeah, we've seen some pretty horrible consequences for that, but like we're not able to see that energy channeled towards more productive efforts either. And I think that's something that's like increasingly been a source of frustration for a lot of people, especially as we've seen. And like yeah, like from like the Whitmer perspective is like, well, like if we don't if I like there's ways that as governor I've got to work for the president, blah blah blah. I get that on some level, but just optically, like there's got to be what better ways to do that, and like what are we getting out of it, right? That's not clear to me. I mean, I guess that was around the time that you had what was it? Oh, the restructuring of the tariffs to like on like the automotive like inputs, right? So like the
Right.
steel and whatnot that they're importing for that. But it's just I don't know. I mean, it's just like again, it's like there's certain things you can work with the the fascist for, I guess. But at the end of the day, you're still working with fascists, and that's never going to be um, easy to reconcile.
Exactly. It's almost like I understand you can't really put the genie back into the bottle with some of this, but like there's a blanket inability to acknowledge what has happened. And I think even I don't know if you've been able to follow the 50-51 protests that have been happening, but it seems a lot more anemic even from like the early resistance to Trump in the first term. And I don't know if that's because there's less institutional support for being anti-Trump, if it's because there has been a weakening and systematic I don't know if this is the right way to look at it, but just like housebreaking of any popular dissent in the United States following the first Trump term, or if people are just checked out and depressed. I think that's probably the biggest factor in all of this. But it's the opposition to the Trump administration is increasingly incoherent. It's not really organized on ideological lines, which isn't a bad thing per se. But
Mhm.
what do you make of an anti-Trump protest where you have DSA members pulling up as well as people calling Trump a communist? I don't know what you do with that. I don't fucking know
I
what
mean,
you fucking do with that.
I
Like,
know we want to like do the episode like where we go like interrogate like what progressive really means. I mean, maybe it's even worth like just doing another one on communist and whatnot because I think just in the American context, it's such a meaningless thing. Because like I mean, everyone like like they use communist to refer to Trump pejoratively too. So like it's just one of those terms I think it's just like poisoned in the American context. So you can't really use it for any. I mean, mostly because of the Cold War, but yeah,
well, and I think that that's what this comes down to more broadly, right? Is that contemporary American society has, and we've said this before on the show. I think this is probably one of the holdovers from last year that's going to stick around. Hopefully not long, but it's going to stick around. People have just gotten stupider.
yeah.
Political education gets worse every year, and the people doing that political education have a warped perception
Hey,
on their
I didn't come
side.
here to get this shade. What the hell?
No, not you, not you. I'm talking about like when I mean political. I'm talking more so like at the
I know what you're talking about.
organizational
Yeah,
level.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm not trying to bust your chops
No,
here.
I was messing.
Yeah, yeah. Because I'm like kind of pointing at like PragerU, right? Where it's like their
Yeah.
own ideology is incredibly contradictory, it's incredibly flawed.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, they have a dual bind of like they need to think that way so they can continue to do so. And they benefit by continuing to muddy the waters and by not acknowledging things that would break their perception of reality or facts that run counter to that, right? And you
Sure.
kind of see you see this with the magnification of the online right. You see it with how social media and what it has become at this point, especially with AI slop just ruining the internet as it stands, proliferating this kind of intense misinformation and intense people are just getting stupider. It
Yeah.
continues to get stupider, and people like in their nihilism or in their like desperation or sadness about current events just have been encouraged to embrace it, embrace
Yeah.
being petty, embrace being stupid, embrace being selfish. And it's animated the right, like we've talked about, but we're just seeing that what qualifies not exactly as the left but as the opposition in this country is willing to throw their hands up and drink the Kool-Aid as well.
Yeah.
That should worry everybody. What we do about that is also it's also suspect because like we talked about in previous episodes, and this just continues to be the case especially now, these decisions have been made for us well before we even came on the scene, well before we even understood what was going on, and they continue to stay out of our hands. So what can one do? And like again, this is the repeat prescription I've been giving of like accepting what is in your control and understanding why something's out of your control will give you a greater clarity on what you can and can't do. But it's also cold comfort. I completely agree that like that's not the best advice I could give someone, or at least it's not the most soothing advice I could give someone.
Yeah. For sure.
I don't know where else I wanted to go with this. Fuck John Fetterman. What else can we say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the story here. I mean, and it's like I'm somewhat sympathetic that like yeah, like okay, there this he had a stroke and whatnot, but like on some level, I mean, you have to have like some level of personal accountability, right? That was before he was even elected. He's been in office for over 2 years. Um, Screw the people around him who have like enabled it too, right? Like, I mean, I think some of the staffers, right, are just scared and like they don't really have much they can do anyways. But like certainly someone in Gentleton's position had more power, right? And he sat on these stories for years because it was beneficial to his bizarre project that people maintain some level of, I guess, positive impression of Fetterman. But like, I mean, he's lost all his goodwill a long time ago. I don't know anyone who's like, like, yeah, this is where my views align.
I mean that's 100% it. Like Fetterman has run out of all his goodwill that he earned through his career. Even like the criticisms that were levied against him, people were at least able to like view it in the sense of well, at least him being this openly progressive kind of can cover for some of that. But it just in trying to self-destruct through pettiness, he's lost all of it. And I think if you look
Yeah.
at not just Gentleton's choice to sit on all this as long as he did, and then bring it to attention when it was expedient for him to cover his ass. Let his own words, speak for themselves. This is an opinion piece he wrote for the New York Times, November 16th, 2024. So this is his immediate response, his immediate fucking response to the blowout, right? I'm trying to find the statement that just like really fucking got under my skin. Because basically what he's getting at is like actually Democrats are losing because of far left interest groups, and I'm like, name them. Name which fucking policies they fucking like ruined for people. But okay, here we go. So our bench is strong, but if we let interest groups dictate the incentive structure for the second resistance as they did the first, overperformers like Mr. Gallego and Miss Glusenkamp Perez will be pulled to the left in politically disastrous ways, or they will simply be overlooked, as was the case in the 2020 presidential primary for candidates with strong electoral records like Amy Klobuchar or Steve Bullock. Supermajority thinkers should concede nothing on righteousness. In politics, winning in elections is the moral imperative. You go into this business to change people's lives for the better. That means changing policy, and to change policy, you have to win. Those who would
And, like,
rather...
the thing is, I don't fundamentally like. I'm cynical enough. I don't fundamentally disagree with that premise. However, it is fundamentally unclear to me what policies you pass when you win an election looks like for these folks.
And that's what I'm saying, right? Is like you're putting the cart before the horse, and we understand, right, that it's purely cynical for him to say that. It's purely
Yeah.
like misleading. He's trying to like pull a fast one over you, right? And it's his last sentence that says it. Those who would rather lose elections so they can feel better about themselves leave the real suffering to the people they claim to fight for. No one wins when we lose. It is time to start winning again. Okay. All right. How'd that work out? How is that working out right now?
Well, and like that's the thing too. Is like it's not clear to me. I mean, and I know some people are like, well, like Harris lost because she was pulled too far to the left or whatever.
Where
And
was
it's
she
like,
pulled too far to the left? That's what I'm saying.
I know that it's this ongoing issue of like that's kind of how people more or less selectively interpret this stuff. And to me, like, I don't necessarily know, like, if like, okay, it was, that she's moved away from the left wasn't necessarily what cost the election, but I would say that I do think there's a very good chance that, um, like, because she had so little time to like define herself, that the usual route of, um, kind of, drifting more towards the middle for election season hurt her because it made her look more disingenuous. Um, I think very much that's almost certainly the case. Um, but you're not, and again, like I say, it's like overachievers like Camp Perez. Like, I mean, again, like why are like fundamentally think of why are these people being quote unquote overlooked, right? It's not like in her case, it's not that like, oh well, she's just focused on the job, she's not like campaigning, stuff like that. I mean, maybe that's part of it, but the thing is, anytime she makes headlines, it's because she voted for something that people fucking hate. That is almost always how these folks like how they make all their headlines is like they did something that pissed people off, and it's like, oh, this is what we should be doing, because somehow being known for pissing people off will improve you in the context of winning. I don't know, whatever the median voter is, as this like mythical individual who probably doesn't even really act or behave in the way that they're suggesting they do.
Which is, and again, it's like we can talk also about anti-establishmentism and why that went towards the right this recent cycle, and why it found a home in Trumpism, so to speak. But I think it's like, again, it's like this institutionalist push to the center speaks to this idea of the system works, don't you agree? And Trump embodying this, well, I'm going to change it, even though we know that he's actually going to just use it to make things worse, right? Is a gamble that how do I say this? People that don't subscribe to our particular framework or understanding would feel safe taking that bet.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here, right? Where it's like you're using anger as like this proof of concept of your ability to win votes, when in reality it's like it's just another red herring. What do these people fundamentally stand for? I don't know anymore.
Exactly.
And that's what people want to know, right? Is like you know, I get it. Everyone's sick of like the culture war being used as like a way to put words in people's mouths. Everyone's sick of negative partisanship. Everyone's sick of the loss of civility and the increased rancor of political discourse these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
But people want to know that when someone stands for something, it's something that makes sense to them, or
Yeah.
it speaks to some emotional reality of theirs. And Fetterman burned all his fucking goodwill, saying he was one person and repeatedly eroding away at that. When
Yeah,
people talk about, go ahead, go ahead.
and I was gonna say, and then like I think that like some people who like kind of on like the more left space who've kind of been um I don't know, antagonistic towards like you should have been able to see through like his grift all along. I don't think that's particularly helpful either. And like it doesn't fundamentally change the fact that like yeah, like people like politicians, yeah, they construct a narrative. Sometimes you're able to push back against that narrative. The thing is, and like in Fetterman's case, it's kind of like I think voters were between a rock and a hard place, right? It's like obviously Dr. Oz sucked. Um, Fetterman's opponent in the primary wasn't a winner either.
Mhm.
So it's just like you're just in this weird position when it comes to all that, where there really wasn't an ideal winning scenario where you would have had something better than what we got out of this, other than Fetterman being the person that he professed to be.
Exactly. And I think there's always going to be a type of person who, like you said, is going to be like, I called it 6 years ago, you're stupid.
Yeah,
What really is going on here, and I think like this is for those members of the Democratic caucus who are self-professed progressives, or they um have benefited from the goodwill they've gotten from people who profess those views, right? And this is the repeat. Like I think again, when people mischaracterize some of the criticism of AOC as like, well, okay, what do you want her to do? I think what I am trying to see this as these days is you have only so long before the people who are along for the ride lose faith in some aspect of this, whether it's you, whether it's the system, whether it's the institution, whether it's whatever you're promising, right?
sure.
You need to understand that attrition is going to exist, and it's something that you need to manage. Whether and I don't want to go full LinkedIn mode on this because my brain's been in fucking careerist mode. Oh my god! But like whether you're trying to like keep customers for your business, whether you're trying to like win elections, or whether you're trying to like win friends and influence, whatever your game is, right?
Yeah,
You will lose people to attrition the more you fuck up. And that's
sure.
like the criticism of Bernie and AOC right now. It's not that. I mean, you could even say, because like I know we talked previously in March about like ideological purity and like, is it poisoning things? I think it's less of ideological purity being a poison pill and more of, we've lost so many people to attrition just with how shitty everything has been these past couple years.
I
And
think that's fair.
and I think the progressive movement, as we called it, right? Like, it was an attempt to bring people who were fed up with the system, bring people who were disenfranchised or disaffected in some way back into some kind of movement. And we can, of course, talk at length about how maybe a presidential campaign with Bernie Sanders at the helm wasn't the way to do that, right? It was a way to give people hope. It was a way to get people invested in something. And it was a way to get people on board with some kind of positive change in this country.
Hmm.
If you continue to lose all that to attrition, what's left but the right getting what they want, the right picking up the ball on everything the Democrats abandoned, and this current miserable state of affairs? I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. That is the price of being disingenuous. That is the price of making compromises that don't make sense to people. That is being unable to unexplain, not being able to explain your position. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think to some extent like it's difficult in certain cases, right? I mean, I certainly think that with people like AOC and Bernie, it's it's much more nuanced. Like with Fetterman, it's like there's no nuance to that story, right? So I think that like
100%.
this is like the easy way to sort of just talk about that, right? Where it's like, yeah, like people feel betrayed because even if like, oh sure, like whatever, we let's give him a quote unquote pass on like his Israeli position because this wasn't like it's not like he overtly contradicted himself there. But the thing is like in that process, he has also overtly contradicted himself on a million other issues. He has
Exactly.
forsaken a lot of other positions and has kind of just taken this attitude of let's just be openly antagonistic of people in my voter base just because I dislike them for one reason or another. And that's just kind of where we're at.
Exactly. Selfishness, resentment, and pettiness are the order
Mhm.
of the day.
Yeah.
So that's our resurgent contribution to our Profiles in Shame series. Um, any other closing thoughts? Because I think we've really exhausted this one.
Yeah, I would agree.
Um, yeah, so I'll definitely link the articles that we discussed in this episode in the episode description. You'll find all the other handy links in the episode notes. And is there anything else you'd like to plug or share today, Josh?
No, not today. Just keep your eyes open and continue to observe and dissect the world around you.
We're all trying to figure this out right now, so you're not alone. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into this one, dear listeners. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.